that's totally fine. My name is Kanika Pandey, and I'm going to be hosting today's session for Ask Me Anything Town Hall. Today's session is a part of our inaugural Momentum 2020 event. Thank you all so much for attending and joining us today. We're super excited to be bringing you this amazing lineup of speakers that you can learn from to optimize your team's performance and drive better business outcomes. I'd also like to take this time to thank our awesome event sponsors, Outreach, ZoomInfo, Connect and Sell, AirCall, Sapper Consulting, ScaleX, and Speckit. Please visit the sponsor pages on the Momentum event website to learn more about these great organizations. Some housekeeping items today, guys. This session will be recorded, and we are going to share it with everyone afterwards as well. If you do have any technical issues, definitely throw those into the chat. And if you do have questions for the speakers, definitely throw those into the chat. We want this to be as interactive as possible. To start with though, go ahead and throw in where you're from and a win from this week if you'd like to share that with the rest of the group. At this time though, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Scott Leese. Scott Leese, in the beginning of this call, I called him a jack of all trades, and I think that's an accurate description. Just a couple of accomplishments. Scott founded his own company in 2016, which is focused on sales strategy and process along with sales training. Back in 2018, he created Surf and Sales, which takes sales conferences to another level, giving a way to create meaningful relationships and transform your experience. And he's an author. He's a bestseller on Amazon, Addicted to the Process. So you guys can hear from the man himself. Scott Leese, take it away.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. And thank you, Kanika, for that wonderful introduction. We need to introduce the rest of the panelists here. And rather than me trying to do it for them, I'd love for them to do it themselves real quick. Just going to work left to right on my screen. Christina, can we start with you?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Christina Brady. I'm the president of a company called Sales Assembly. Little bit about me. I've been in the tech sales space for about 15 years, about a decade of that in leadership, and the majority of my experience has been building revenue orgs and working with sales reps and sales leaders and helping companies to scale. So I am really excited to be here and talk to all of you.
Awesome. And where are you based, Christina?
I'm in Chicago.
In Chicago, all right. And next on my screen is Mario Martinez Jr.
Mr. Scott Leese, thank you, buddy. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. Hey, y'all. Hope you're doing fantastic. I'm the CEO and founder of Vingresso, and Vingresso is the world's largest modern sales training company. We focus exclusively on helping B2B sellers create more sales conversations using digital. You got that right, and I think the world has gone digital. So I'm actually calling in from all the way from what should be beautiful San Francisco Bay Area, Scott. But unfortunately, we are covered with ash right now because of the fires. And the cloud cover is something I've never seen. Everybody thought yesterday Armageddon was coming. It was bad. So that's where I'm from, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, glad to have you here. I'm showing my support for California with my California Republic hat on right now. Melanie Fillet. I hope I said that last name right.
You did. It's a French name, but yes, you got it right. Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Speckit. We're a digital enablement and learning solution really designed to take any sales training, methodologies, competitive battle cards, you name it, and put it right front and center in the tools your teams use every day. And I am calling in from Denver, where it snowed yesterday after being 101 degrees on Saturday. So just lots happening this year, but really excited to be here today.
All right.
Global warming.
Yeah.
And I'm in Austin, Texas. So we've got 4 different parts of the country represented today. So thank you all for joining us. I've got a few questions teed up over here. Some of them were submitted before we got started, but if anybody's out there has some questions for any of us or all of us, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. So let me get started, and we'll kind of give everybody a chance to chime in here on all the different topics. Let me start with this one, which is the topic of the team lead, if you will, and this player coach kind of model. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Can it work? If so, what's the best way to make it work? Is this viable? I've got my opinions, but I don't want to get into my opinions. I want to hear from all of you. So why don't we start with you, Christina? What's your point of view on team leads who are player coaches?
This is such a love-hate relationship for me, to be honest. The reason why I think so many companies lean on this is I see an inherent lack of ability to coach and train people up into leadership because there's so many competing priorities. And so the natural way that a lot of companies do that is they say, okay, well, you're still an individual contributor, but we're going to give you this kind of up-level title and roles and responsibilities and maybe a little bit more money, and you can kind of learn the ropes while straddling the line. Straddling that line becomes very, very difficult. Being a true leader of revenue producers and being a revenue producer yourself from a psychological standpoint is two very, very different ways of thinking and acting and showing up. And as a leader, your entire priority is your people, getting things out of their way, looking out for their career, making sure morale is high, setting the culture on the team, thinking about growth, getting together your KPIs, presenting to leadership. As an individual contributor, it's completely different and demands 100% of your focus. So you're asking somebody to prove that they can do one role by doing two very, very well first. And I've never seen somebody be able to do both of those roles very, very well. So I feel like in a lot of instances, it's almost an unfair position to put someone in, to ask them to do two whole jobs very, very well to prove that they can do one of those jobs very, very well.
Yeah. Mario, let's move over to you. Do you have anything to add? Do you agree or disagree with Christina?
Well, I'm going to disagree with Christina.
Fun of it, right?
I respectfully disagree. But listen, it also depends too, right? So if we're talking about someone who's managing a team of, say, 10 people, then, no, I would agree with Christina. Like, that's very difficult. But if you think about the percent of small businesses that represent the United States, just the USA alone, like I think it's almost 50% of all businesses are small businesses. Most small business providers like Christina and myself, we actually are a player and a coach at the same time. So you actually have to do that job just by being in that small business segment. And it absolutely can be done. With that in mind, the bigger the organization, the bigger the team, the harder it is to play. However, what I would say is what I've seen done very effectively, is taking a sales director as an example, like an individual contributor who is a senior salesperson, and pairing them with a junior. And that model in a one-to-one basis works phenomenally well, where you actually get the leadership that you're looking for, but at the same time, you're getting the one-on-one coaching, and you're doing it together, and you're accomplishing the same goal. So in Vingresso, in fact, how I started out my career was working side by side by a gentleman by the name of Greg Wolf, also found on LinkedIn. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me in terms of my entire career of setting the pace of what I needed to do to be amazing and great. And he taught me everything I needed to know. And after that, that's when I started making six figures in 1 year, right? So that was the key for me. And we've implemented the same exact model here at Vingresso, which works really, really, really well, that you've got a player and a coach, that you're coaching an individual player, and together you're working on deals and you're working on opportunities together.
Yeah, it's interesting how maybe we all interpret the question and that frames our answer, because I would have interpreted it more of like, Series A, Series B kind of startup, and there's like a half dozen to a dozen reps, and more of what Christina, I think, was talking about.
Right.
Mario interpreted this differently. So, Melanie, what about you? You can act as the tiebreaker here.
Well, and it's actually interesting because I've kind of seen it go very well and not so much. And so in my own experience, and I come from more of an operations background, I was that team player coach role. And I think I had such a desire for moving into leadership, as a younger professional at the time in my career. It was such a great opportunity for me to prove myself. And so I think, I like that added responsibility, but I also had the personality where I was willing to put in whatever hours were necessary to make it work. When we tried doing that actually early on at our company, Speckit, and we had one of our AEs who, was absolutely crushing it in his role, still does. But before we, really made the decision to hire an SDR manager, he was looking for leadership. I was like, hey, why don't the SDRs report up to you? And so we tried that, and just from a bandwidth standpoint and just having a split time between, do I, schedule this big demo? Do I respond to these big customers, do my follow-ups, or do I coach these SDRs that are working on messaging? It was just really hard to make that decision. And so I think, it really depends on, to your point, like the size of the company, where you guys are at, and also just like the individual at hand and their capacity to be able to switch contexts like that and really prioritize accordingly. So we probably won't be doing that model anytime soon here personally.
It is a good way to pressure test whether somebody is capable of moving into leadership though, right? Like all of a sudden you have these additional responsibilities, and rather than being focused on one thing, oh boy, I have to focus on 4 or 5, 6 different things at once. And the higher you go in leadership, it's more of that kind of thinking and operating that you've got to do. So it is an interesting way to go about it. Let's shift a little bit towards coaching now in the remote world that we're in, utilizing tools like Exec Vision and tools like this. Everybody, I think, is well aware now that call recordings are extremely valuable. I don't know about you, but about most of you, but like there was no such thing as call recordings when I was growing up selling. I never got to listen to my own calls. We didn't even have a cell phone that could record them, right? So are there new and interesting ways that you're seeing teams or you're advising people to utilize call coachings and call recordings specifically versus pre-pandemic? Or is it the same? Or are you leaning more into it? How's all that working? Let's start with you, Mario.
Yeah, you remember the good old days when all of us were growing up, we had this little thing called the Y connector, and we would sit in the cubes and people would plug up next to us and they would, listen in on your calls, and that's how you got our training and coaching. And that's how most of us grew up who are essentially about that 45 and older. That's how we grew up in terms of sitting in the sales cube. Well, guess what? There's no sales cubes available for you to sit in, number one. And number two, the last time I saw someone with a Y connector was probably 1990. And so what do we do now? Well, tools like and platforms like Exec Vision or other tools that are out there allow us to be able to essentially Y connect. And that is to digitally listen to a call and then have the opportunity on the screen at that moment in time where someone has said something that you say, hey, if you said it this way, or if you focused on this, or if you changed that, this might help. And that coaching I cannot understate how important that is to be able to do that day in and day out. In fact, I'm delivering a keynote in just about another 2 hours from now. And specifically, one of the challenges that sales leaders are having today in terms of being able to hit their quota in a virtualized selling environment is the fact that they have ineffective sales coaching plans. And what you should be doing more than ever, because you have no idea what that person is saying at their home because you're not sitting there, you should all the more so be listening in to at least one rep call per week, per rep, that you should be listening, at least at a very minimum, and providing written and verbal coaching feedback to that particular rep. Sorry.
It's okay. You got it out. You did okay. Melanie, let's move over to you. One interesting thing that Mario mentioned with this Y connector, which even predates me, Mario. So thank you for not making me the oldest person on the panel. I appreciate that. Is the difference between like live coaching and listening into a call and post-call being completed and the recording and listening to that? I wonder, are you seeing or advising people to do more of like live call coaching, or is it all after the call, like post-call is over and utilizing the recordings? Or, feel free to take that question and go backwards and expand on Mario's answer if you like as well.
Yeah, so we definitely try and sit in calls when we can with reps, especially big ones, and give verbal cues or chats. But I tend to see that coaching being a little bit distracting when done virtually, right? If I'm pinging them on the side while they're trying to pitch to the customer. And so what we found is just using those call recordings were huge on conversational intelligence for a couple of reasons. One, from an onboarding standpoint, like there is nothing more effective than creating a playlist, whether that's for your SDRs or I just onboarded our new VP of sales, which is, hey, here's a bunch of different demos, different use cases, different personas you can go listen to, tag me if you have any questions, and like really using that functionality in the platform to train. So I think just from like a training and onboarding standpoint, it's huge. And then to your point, from a coaching standpoint, right? One, for the reps to coach themselves so they can actually go back and listen in a more effective way. And of course, B, so that then we can step in as the manager, as the coach. And up until recently, I was that coach for most of our account executives, going in and listening to those calls as well. And I think, especially in enterprise sales, right, where several weeks might go by between a call and the follow-up, it's really helpful to have those recordings to be able to go in and search a keyword and say, hey, yeah, I want to go back to that point in the call. And we're starting to look at ways to make that process more efficient. So because we use these platforms, our reps don't take as many handwritten notes. They're very present on the call, but they're starting to really, instead of taking all the notes that they normally would on a call, I've just recommended, like, hey, if you're on a call and you notice something really important that gets said by your prospect or question asked, just make a note of the minute when it was asked. And so then they can go back and look at that specific part of the conversation. And we found that it's an effective way for them to stay present and focused on the call, but still have an effective way to go back and listen to those specific parts as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm glad you said that. I do the same exact thing. Like, if you look at my notepad, it's like 1:35, like minute in 35 seconds, and then 7:23, right? Like, it's like code. So I'm really glad you shouted that out, because it makes me feel less neurotic that it's only me who does that. What about you, Christina? How are you seeing people use call recordings now versus pre-pandemic?
Yeah, first thing I will say, Mario, I am, not in my 40s yet, but my first sales job 15 years ago, I worked in selling insurance. And I remember the boss would come around with the Y cord and you'd be like on the phone with your stupid headset, like calling on paper leads. And he would come sit down and just plug in and you're like, so I remember that. And I had a cube. So you're not that old. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Make me feel good.
Or maybe I'm older than I realize, or maybe just the insurance industry needs to step it up into their technology. I mean, I would say that very, very obviously people are using call recording a lot more now. At least I hope that they are. There is something to be said for in the moment, in person, hot off a call coaching and feedback. If anything, just from a psychological standpoint, when you're having somebody listen to a call and right after, there's that immediate human need of like, what do you think? How did I do? And you're so open to hearing the feedback at that time because it just happened. So it's like that idea of striking with the feedback when the iron is hot. The downside to listening to a call recording and then delivering feedback is you have to almost get someone back in the mindset of that call and what they were thinking, and you have to reestablish where you were in order to give the feedback, and it could lose a little bit of its luster. That being said, it's one of the only tools that we have right now, short of a sales leader joining every call with their ICs to understand what is their skill set like, how are they coming across on calls, what are new client objections that we're getting now that we may not know about. Like, it's a way to keep your ear to the ground, not just to up-level your people, but just to also understand what's happening in your customer landscape. So while it's a different way of coaching, it can be very, very effective in a remote environment, and it can actually impact multiple facets of your business.
One of the interesting things that one of you just mentioned, I can't remember which one already, but we talked about using it in onboarding. And onboarding is something that I'm seeing over the last 6 months being a point of stress and anxiety for both sides of the table, both the employer trying to figure out how to onboard new hires and the employee who's trying to figure out how to get integrated into this new company and learn what the hell they're supposed to do. So, Melanie, let's start with you. What are some onboarding best practice, remote onboarding best practices specifically right now that employers should be focused on providing, and maybe one or two tips for the employees who are being onboarded?
Absolutely. And I think, especially with more junior roles, right, in the sales world, like SDRs, et cetera, where this might be their first real job ever in the workplace. I think something to be mindful of is, remote, it's a lot harder to build those real connections in the workplace, right? So not only are they, possibly learning to operate in the business world for the first time, but they don't even know yet who in the company is friendly that they can go to when they have questions. And so it's a very, I think, isolating experience just from what I'm hearing from some of our peers and actually my cousin who just joined a company as a freshman SDR. So I think like just the psychological impact is really important. So how can you create as much collaboration between the teams? We've really taken the approach where we hire in pairs. And I think right now, one, there's a benefit to that period, but I think especially right now, having someone else that's kind of in the same boat that they can rely on each other, especially in that virtual setting, can remove some of that isolation. So just something from a tip standpoint, I think is helpful if you guys have the luxury of being able to do that. And then, like I said, like we use conversational intelligence tools like Executive Vision, which are huge. We create different onboarding tracks. And then I'll actually sit down, or our SDR manager will sit down and have conversations around it. We happen to have a remote training tool. That's what we do. So we put every single thing that an employee needs to know in our tool that they can access in Gmail, Slack, you name it. And then in terms of like measuring that performance, we're just doing a lot more check-ins than we used to. So whether you're an AE or an SDR, we have a check-in every morning with the team lead. We're checking in at the end of the day as well. We're making sure we're available. I think like the most important piece is just showing that like while you're not physically there, you're still very present and there to help guide them through their success. So I think just more check-ins, and then what did I say earlier? The other piece would be the two things I'd focus on.
Great. Christina, do you agree with Melanie in terms of specifically about this, like more check-ins and daily check-ins and more of them and things like that? I'm real curious about that part, because I'm thinking to myself, do I want all that? I don't know. Maybe I do. What do you think?
Well, I agree with her, because I think what she's talking about is trying to replace the familiarity and the comfort of being together with people. If I'm sitting in the same room with you, I don't have to walk over and be like, hi, because I'm in the room with you. There's that innate, we are here and we are together, and you can hear people on the call and you can join in on conversations and you can stop by somebody's desk. And part of the reason that teams build culture is because of that ability to be close to each other and hear in the moment and give feedback in the moment. We don't have that now. And so I agree with her wholeheartedly that it does require an increase in more deliberate types of activities to put these check-ins in place, to try to replicate that as much as we can so that we have our ear to the ground.
Okay. Mario, what about you? What can you add to this?
Well, this is definitely one of our domains, right? As a modern sales training company, little over 3.5 years ago, many of my peer CEOs at different sales training companies looked at me sideways when I predicted, not I, our leadership team predicted that the world would go virtual in 5 years. And the days of in-person trainings, 2-day events, 1-day, workshops, boot camps, all that stuff was dead, gone, in my opinion, old and archaic, and 1980s, which is the way I learned back then, and the 90s. And that we needed to change. Well, unfortunately, COVID came and that changed the world, which also changed forever training. And so with that in mind, I agree with both my counterparts, Christina and Melanie. And with that, it's keeping something in mind that a lot of companies, both enablement departments, leaders, and training companies have really struggled with is the traditional training sales methodology versus virtual sales training methodology. And one of the things we have to remember that in the traditional sales training methodology, which has been known for many, many, many years, including as recent as this year, republished and restudied, was that 70% of B2B sellers forget the information that they learned within a week's worth of training. 70%. We've known this for, 40 years, yet we continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. So virtual training is probably the best thing that could have ever happened to the sales world when done right. Why? Well, if you look at the number of different studies that are out there, the neuroscience of training, as well as things like the forgetting curve, you will understand that 80% of information that you're taught over a 60-day period, which is called the spacing effect, is actually retained by an individual. And so the good news is you want to be looking at your sales training and onboarding programs over the course of at least 60 days. But that doesn't deal with the issue of sales leaders saying, I want them to produce right now. I need activity going right now. So what do you do in that interim? Well, we brought on sales folks in our organization back in March, in the middle of COVID. Literally, they started March 16th, and the few days later, I think it was March 17th, but a couple days later, COVID hit, and we had to completely go all virtual. because I was planning on flying down out to them and working with them for a month. So what we did is we said, all right, we're going to go through exactly as Melanie said. We're going to deliver training. We're going to meet with them 3 times in the day. We're going to take breaks, and we're going to do group collaboration while they're doing the on-demand. And then on top of that, we're going to do presentation exercises. And within 3 weeks, they're going to be on the phones. So that was the modeling. And I think if people think about the whole concept of training, there's 3 things that we should probably think about as sales leaders. There's the testing effect, the spacing effect, and the chunking technique. The testing effect is pretty standard and what we've always do. Test what it is that you expect. The spacing effect is separate that training out over the course of time, because that's how learners are going to retain that information. And the chunking technique is take whatever you're going to be training and have a maximum of 7 modules, 7 phases, 7 items. We in our training program have 6. We have 6 phases. And all the individual modules and submodules fall into a phase so that you can categorically in your brain identify, yes, I'm going into prospecting, or yes, I'm going into connecting on LinkedIn. Yes, I'm going into whatever it might be. And those 3 techniques have dramatically helped a lot of organizations and certainly will improve the long-term retention of information.
Yeah.
I love everything you said there, except for the part when you said sales leaders are demanding productivity straight away. The CEOs, Mario, are smashing the sales leader for immediate productivity. So let's spread the blame around a little bit. This is my high horse that I get on, where I protect all VPs of sales like they're my younger brother or younger sister, right? So let's and we know where that push comes from. That comes from the VCs above the CEOs, right? Let's shift here, because we got some live questions from the audience.
Scott, can I just add one more thing to what Mario said? Just one quick comment. One thing too, just to be mindful of, is when you're doing trainings on competitors or whatnot, like I don't think there's ever been a more important time to just put that in writing as well. Making sure to follow up and reinforce that training with documentation. I think we're seeing a lot of companies making sure that your competitive battle cards are documented, like all your sales methodologies, your messaging, etc. You know, the time of like not having documentation that your teams can refer to in the moment or like after a training is gone. And so for those of you that are listening, you know, make sure that you're doing regular check-ins, but you know, given the way that different people learn, some people will learn a lot digitally, some people will need to like, you know, then see it in writing and like kind of process it at their own pace. So just being aware of how different minds process information will help make sure that you're really catering to all the different kinds of learners in your team as well.
That's a great call out right there. We've got 3 live questions that are all in the same kind of vein. The first one is from Andrea, and her question is, why are sellers not more effective? Why are sellers not seeing more effective results on digital platforms like LinkedIn or video? Let any of you take that who wants to go first.
We're seeing great results. So.
Yeah, that's my response too. So one of you take it.
So I'll speak to that's certainly what we're seeing. Most sale. First off, let's start out with true stats. Statistics show that roughly around 60% of all sellers report that the hardest thing in sales right now is getting that first conversation. It's the prospecting piece. Hands down, the hardest thing. And that has been the same stat that has been published multiple times year over year for the last like 4 years in a row. And it's even worse now. Why? Well, because all of our buyers are digitally engaged with this exact same thing that all of our sellers are. So they're digitally connected, socially engaged, mobile attached, and video hungry. So we've got to be cognizant of the fact that our buyers are getting hit in all directions from all sellers. But here's the big but, and it has a big but. B-U-T, that is. That was a funny one. Sorry, I didn't expect that one to come out like that. And the but is but we're doing it all wrong. And that goes back to, Scott, your defense about sales leaders. I would argue, having sat in the seat for 22 years, having managed a $300 million year organization, and having grown up all in corporate sales for 18 of those 22 years, the fact of the matter is sales leaders today, they have not figured out what it is that is required of them to be able to change and move to the new digital environment. So what we've done is we've taken the same crap that we were putting out on email, all that crappy email, the spray and pray, and we've now told our sellers, go put it out on LinkedIn. Just go see if you can connect with them without any relevance or context, and developing the skill. And the fact of the matter is when you and I, all of us are sitting here listening, when we were trained how to cold call, it didn't happen just by listening to one cold call, and it didn't happen just by doing the Y connector one time. It happened over the course of many years, even sometimes months. And that's the problem, where we've taken these new channels, LinkedIn and video, text messaging, and we've taken the same stuff that we did here and we applied it here, because sales leaders don't understand what it takes because they aren't doing it themselves.
Christina or Melanie, you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think building off of what Mario said right in the start of it, which to me is, if they're not seeing results, like, define what is the result. Is the result I'm not making a sale, or is the result I'm not engaging in what should be the next step, which is simply let's talk more. And I think so often when sellers are sending messages on LinkedIn or sending a video, they're measuring the wrong thing. The goal for any cold outreach should not be to sell your product to them. It should be to have them lean in and be engaged enough to want to talk to you more. But when you're reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, I mean, at least for me, a lot of the messages that I get are messages that are very, very subjective to the person sending them to me. And they're emailing me with a message that under the line say, my product is perfect for you. Let's hop on a call together. And you haven't earned the right to do that. I think you have to go into every conversation being very, very curious to determine if there's a fit, and then want to simply talk more about it. And so it comes down to the fundamental training of, with these types of outreach, what is the ultimate goal? And if your goal is wrong, that's going to come through in your messaging, and no one is going to respond, because, again, to Mario's point, it just blends in with everybody else who is shoving their product in your face, versus what you should really be doing as a salesperson, which is generating curiosity. Curiosity is the most powerful thing that you can generate as a salesperson. Curiosity sells deals, not your product.
My favorite thing about what you just said is earn the right.
Yeah.
Like, you haven't earned the right yet to talk to me or demand an hour of my time or anything like that. Melanie, I'm going to switch to you, and I'm going to pivot the questioning a little bit. Diego has a question now that says, what is your top tip for digital sales prospecting on LinkedIn, for example? So how do you do this right? We just kind of heard maybe some of the reasons why it's not working. How do you do it correctly?
So I can't speak as much to me personally. I post a lot and try and engage with just interesting content, but one of our SDRs just like blew her quota out of the water last month, and actually like got double what she had to, and it was actually all via videos on LinkedIn. And I looked at a few of them, and what I noticed she was doing, and what I was really happy to see, is that she was just being herself in these videos, and like just being really, really authentic. Like, she wasn't in like sales mode where it's just like, hey, I'm Megan from Speckit and like I'm doing this. Like, she was just like, hey, you know, here's why I'm reaching out. I saw this, you know, etc. She was really taking that same approach, Christina, that you were describing in terms of earning the right. And so I think, you know, the number one tip I'd say is just like, be yourself and be authentic. Like, if you receive this video, would you respond to it? Is this how you would go talk to a peer of yours, a friend of yours, when you were describing? And obviously, you know, hold yourself to the right standard, but you know, if you're going to use social selling, realize that you're connecting with a human on the other end of the line, and just try and be yourself. Be authentic. Like, I think at the end of the day, people will respond to that as well as the right relevant message more than anything else.
Christina, can you add any top tips for digital prospecting, specifically on LinkedIn?
To me, it comes down to perfecting your elevator pitch, and you have to say something that, again, makes somebody want to lean in. And the perfect pitch isn't, you know, I was looking at your page and I see that you're in B2B sales. I am too. We've helped lots of people and we're awesome. I would love to set up time. That's like, it's like that's coming at me so aggressively that like, I don't want to talk to you. So like, to lean
into my inbox.
Yeah. I almost like physically move away from my computer when I get a message like that. And the icing on the cake is then, if you want to talk further, here's my calendar, pick a time. Like, for one, I was like, I know that you sent that same message to 50 other people. And as someone who was in sales, I get that you did that and I get why you did that. But the fact that I can feel it makes me not want to talk to you. And so it comes down to what Melanie is saying, which is you need to find a way to come across as a human and do it en masse. One really quick and super tactical tip is hit people in one industry at a time. So like, don't take a message and send it to 50 random people who are all going to interpret it and go, okay, well, that's not relevant to me. It's like, find VPs of one specific type of product at one specific type of company and curate a list of those and then make a message that is fitting to those if you have to do things en masse. But putting more thought behind it, and like to what Mario was saying, like the spray and pray, I talk about that all the time. Like I feel when I get one of those. So there's a lot of work that has to happen with perfecting that elevator pitch. There's trainings that you can go to on it, but it just comes down to that. Like if your intent is off, I feel it before I even open your LinkedIn message. Like I see the initial line and I'm like, oh boy, you know, and you can fix that. You can come across like a human because you are one.
Yeah, and some of us who get pitched constantly with these kind of messages are starting to take drastic measures to further filter those kind of things out, whether it's add your middle initial into your profile or stick an emoji and then a space before your name in your profile, which I've done. So now I get these messages. It's like, hello, surfer emoji. And I'm like, okay, don't have to take that one seriously. That's super helpful, right? What is a good tip you can give Diego here, Mario, about how to prospect effectively on LinkedIn specifically?
We actually have our Selling with LinkedIn and Selling with Sales Navigator training program, and both for enterprises and for individuals. And one of the biggest things that we talk about is leveraging the PVC sales methodology. And I'm talking about PVC piping. Yeah, that's the same thing, PVC. So the P stands for personalize. We're in an era now with a completely digital buyer and a digital seller. We're in an era now where we have to be thinking about how to hyper personalize all of our messaging to stand out from the crowd. Now, that's not always possible. So at a very base minimum, you need to personalize to the buyer persona. You need to be speaking to the pain that you solve with your specific solution. And guess what? If they don't have that pain, then you probably don't want to be talking to them anyways, right? So think about how to personalize that particular message. And we're not talking about, hey, I saw that you went to Cal Berkeley, University of Cal Berkeley. So did my granddaddy's auntie's uncle's twice removed cousin. No, we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is how to personalize messaging and content to what they're engaging with, what's important to them, what's important to that particular buyer. Then we go to the V for value, bring value. In every engagement, you've got to give to get. What do I mean by that? You better darn well give value every time you reach out and engage with a customer. Why? Because they're getting 1,000 messages from everybody else. So you better bring some V, which is some value. And that's a specific webinar, a white paper, an ebook. And don't make it gated, by the way. Someone just sent me oh, by the way, I'll give you the gated information on training industry if you take my meeting with me. What? No, I'm not taking a meeting with you because you just told me that. So you give me value and bring me those sales assets so I can see the data to help me make decisions better in my business. And then the C is always include a call to action. And most sellers immediately want to go to a C for a meeting, call to action for a meeting. Guess what? On social and or email and or video, that may not be the right call to action.
Yeah,
the right
that's
call to action,
not the right call to action anymore, I don't think. I think that's gone.
Exactly. Our goal needs to be able to create engagement, to move that online conversation into an offline discussion. And to do that, you've got to engage that buyer by asking questions that get them to respond. And then you can earn the right, like you said, Scott, earn the right, or maybe it was Christina, somebody said it, earn the right to be able to get that meeting. So I would say leverage the PVC in all your communications, whether it's a video, a text, an email, or a LinkedIn message. Personalize, bring value, and have a call to action.
So Maria wants to know, how would you connect social selling and cold calling done well these days? I think said differently, like, how do we know which channel to optimize for? How do we know if we should put 100 touches into the phone today, or email today, or LinkedIn today, or video, or should I write 100 handwritten cards? Or should I send Scott 100 bottles of tequila to see if he'll take his meeting, right? What's the right blend? I think that's what Maria is trying to get at with her question. Melanie, you want to try to take that?
Yeah, so I think like one, it's really understanding who you're reaching out to in terms of the personas, right? If you're sending, or if you're trying to get meetings with people in sales, sales operations, sales enablement, marketing, the likelihood of them being super engaged on LinkedIn, checking it every day, kind of spending time there as a conversation platform is pretty likely. So we've seen a lot of success there. In our case, we also sell to CIOs, right? And we've seen that they're actually not as active on LinkedIn whatsoever. Some, have 200 connections and they're the CIO of a, Fortune 500 company. And so I think like a big piece of it is like one, understanding, the personas that you're reaching out to and what channels are just most likely to work best for them. Also spending time actually looking at the individual, how active are they on LinkedIn? And you can easily find that by going on the profile, looking at recent activity, things like that, to get that pulse as well. And then looking at your connect rates. I mean, at the beginning of COVID, like our connect rates were awful. And I said, you know what? It's not worth the time right now for us to try calling people / like, this is not a time when people want to be getting phone calls every 5 minutes. Like, let's focus on like more high touch, like really, really personalized messaging on LinkedIn to engage them instead. So I think it really depends on your audience, if you look at it from that perspective.
Mario, how do you feel about people switching the channel? So for example, let's say Melanie connects with me and engages with me on LinkedIn, and then suddenly tries to migrate me over to email. Good move, bad move, fair or foul? I'm really curious about this, like channel switching and changing lanes and all that. What are your thoughts on that?
Kind of like if we were out having, I think prospecting as an analogy to we're out having a networking event. And from my perspective, let's just say you and I are out, we're meeting each other for the first time, and we're standing out in the networking event and we're having a drink. You've got a Mai Tai in your hand and I've got cognac. And you're halfway through and we're having a conversation. We just started this, we're just having a starting conversation. You're halfway through it and I take your drink and I swap it out for the cognac and I say, here you go. You're gonna have this now. It was like, wait a minute, we didn't even earn the right to be able to make that switcheroo yet. I may not even be comfortable unless you've given me permission to make that switch. But in most cases, what I think sellers are doing in making that switch is because they're going to a channel where they can be tracked. Meaning they want to be able to attribute that call, that email, that whatever it is to tracking so that they can get tracking back to their numbers. And that is another problem that I have seen in the industry, that sales leaders, again, we're doing 1990s level metric tracking for a 2020 seller.
And marketing leaders. Marketing leaders have this same problem as well.
Sure. So I think the problem is we've got to understand why they're doing it. If they're doing it because of that tracking reason, we need to remove out the idea of, hey, how many calls did you make? How many emails did you send? How many LinkedIn connections did you make? We don't care about the activity. What we should care about is the result. How many meetings did you have today? Conversations. That's what I care about. And then and only then do I go back to, if you're not having enough conversations, to, well, what are you doing? Because what you're doing might not be working. So I think switching the channel, I would say earn the right to switch the channel to be able to make that the most successful for you and the buyer.
I want to mix it up on you, Christina, and go backwards. We were talking about how people are getting the CTA wrong, call to action wrong. Forgive my dog barking in the background, but 2020. What is a CTA done right? If we're not supposed to say, book 30 minutes with me here, grab an hour of my time on my calendar here, what are some good examples of CTAs? I think that would be beneficial for everybody listening to hear about.
I think qualifying your prospect is a good CTA for both of you. If you think of your time and your prospect's time both as valuable things and things that you should respect, then your call to action should make sure that we are a fit to even have a conversation. Like, is there space for us to even have a discussion? So the call to action can be something as simple as, most VPs in sales right now are really concerned about hitting their Q4 numbers, and they're looking to tools and technology to help them along the way. Is this something that you're currently struggling with? Like asking a question like that to allow me to say, actually, yeah, we are. Or, you know what? No, we're really not. Neither of those shut off the conversation. If they say, no, we're not, then you take that and you determine, okay, where do I go with this? No, they're not struggling with that. Good to know that now. Can I find an area of pain that warrants a conversation? Can I find if there's a fit here to basically ask you for your most precious asset, which is your time? And if they come back and they say, that is something that we're struggling with, you also then don't want to spill your candy in the lobby by saying, okay, great, we have a product for you, you should buy it, which a lot of salespeople will also do, which is the wrong thing to do. But it's one step closer. Once you have that CTA and you've gotten the agreement that, like, yes, there is potentially a problem to solve, the next step is determining, okay, are you looking to solve that problem now? Let's determine that. And if you're looking to solve it now, let's talk about whether it makes sense to solve it now with us. And it's like a very, very typical sales process of like, is there a problem? Should we solve it? Should we solve it now? Should you solve it with us? So your initial CTA is really just to get to that next step, to warrant a conversation about solving a problem or increasing a result. Maybe there's not currently pain, but maybe there's something you could be doing better or something you could be maximizing on. As a sales rep, you're doing this also because your time on the phone is precious, and my God, it is expensive. So don't waste your time either by getting on a call with somebody who isn't a fit for your product. Like, you're wasting everyone's time by doing that. So by looking at ourselves as an equal asset as salespeople, that's the right frame of mind to go into a cold caller email with.
I love the call out of like recognizing how much time your time is worth as a seller. So many salespeople are like overly concerned, I think, with the value of other people's time and not their own. I love that.
Yeah.
Staying in this same vein with examples, Mario, can you give everybody some good examples of personalization done well? Like, what if you were going to reach out to me? Like, what's a good personalization? Hyper personalization, even, I think is the phrase you used. Maybe people don't know exactly what that means. What's a good example or two you might give everybody?
Yeah. So first off, you've got the hyper personalization would be, Scott, I heard you on this podcast. Scott, I read your section in this book about, Scott, I saw your post about Black Lives Matter, right? And it really resonated with me because, and by the way, that's a real post that you put out there that has like 10,000 bazillion views on it, right? So, and I know that because I saw it. It hit my my feed. So that is an example of super hyper personalization. But in the absence of, as an example, to Melanie's point, CIOs, definitely in the IT industry, have generally not been that active. And there's other groups as well, procurement, real estate, facilities, those types of folks. They're generally not as active, although you recognize roughly around 20% or so will probably be engaged. But here, let's talk about this. You can personalize to the individual by referencing commonalities, mutual connections, by getting a referral, by looking at a particular article they may have penned, or company culture. They're out there talking about company culture, or very much more importantly, they're CEOs and talking about company culture and what that means and how that trickles down. And you can use that as an entree. So that at least shows that you've done some of your homework. If you feel like it's cheesy, and it's probably not a good use, it probably is. And so what I would say then is go back to the personalization to the buyer persona. And Christina hit the nail on the head. Dear God, please don't waste your time with somebody who does not have a problem that you can solve. So what you're looking for is and a great case for us is we work with sales leaders. So the two questions that we ask with sales leaders is, are you looking to have more sales conversations by your sales team and increase your sales pipeline? If you say, no, I have all the leads that I need, and marketing is doing a phenomenal job with us, and I don't need any more leads, and my sellers don't need to grow the pipeline, hallelujah, great job, have at it. I don't need to talk to you, and I don't want to waste your time. And I certainly don't want to waste mine. And so that's when we look at personalization to the buyer persona, is understanding what your solution solves and the solution that you have and the pain that it solves.
There's a question here that I want to make sure that we get into, and I think we're running into the last kind of 10, 15 minutes or so here. And it's all about one of my favorite topics. It's a super taboo topic. You ready? It has to do with money. It has to do with money. How are comp plans changing and evolving during the pandemic, during virtual work, during the alleged mass migration out of LA, San Francisco, New York, and whatnot? What are you all seeing out there when it comes to money? Christina, you want to go first?
It's wild. I'll put it that way.
Wild in a good way, wild in a bad way, wild in a confusing what the hell kind of way?
I think a little bit of, like, honestly, I think a little bit of all of that, which is like, that's change. I'm seeing a lot of, like, to put a positive spin on this, which I think is really there, I am seeing a lot of innovation. I'm seeing a lot of empathy, and I'm seeing a lot of creativity, because I think for the first time, companies are being forced to determine if their comp plans are really driving the right behavior, and if the behavior is driving the right result. And so I think the introspection that I'm seeing happening of like, hey, our comp plan that worked before suddenly isn't working now. It's making them reevaluate, like, what should a comp plan be incentivizing? Are there other people that we should have on a bonus structure right now that are not? I would say one of the best pieces I'm hearing, because when I say it's wild, I mean, it's like I could take up the rest of the time that we have talking about the directions I hear companies going with how they're changing. So answer one is yes, they are changing and they are amending. But two, one big thing I'm hearing customers focus on is their client lifecycle management and who should be incentivized to do what. There's always so much focus on the front end of the funnel that companies later start thinking about their customer lifecycle only when the lagging indicator of logo retention starts to drop. And then they go, shoot, what's wrong with our customer lifecycle? I'm starting to hear companies say, hey, we should have multiple people that have a horse in the race in terms of value and logo retention. Should we be bonusing our client success people, and should we be giving them a sales quota based on logo retention or NPS or happiness? Like, should we be giving incentives to people we haven't traditionally to drive the behaviors that we want and we need as the world is changing? Regardless of where you land, that's a good conversation to have. You're talking about giving your people a better livelihood and more ability to earn income that is tied directly to one of your business metrics. And there are people that drive ROI for your business that are not salespeople that right now never feel any of that upside. So I'm seeing some creative things happening in there that I think long-term will benefit businesses. But I'm also seeing some wild stuff. I'm just going to put that as wild.
good, bad, ugly examples, Melanie?
I think a lot of our, like, I've been part of a number of different like revenue groups and stuff and seen surveys. And so it seems like across the board, just like quotas and things like that were adjusted during COVID. Speaking to our company specifically, we're lucky because of the space we're in. Remote training software is luckily one of the few technologies that's doing quite well in this space. So despite that, we actually did reduce quotas for AEs. And like my whole mindset around it is that, while demand, if anything, actually accelerated for us, the expectations, more so like the constraints around our team, right? Our account executives, like, that have kids that are at home and they're spending time with their wives, like their COVID did impact productivity, not by the fault of the individual necessarily at hand, but by the fault of just the world that we're living in right now. And so we made some adjustments just to kind of demonstrate to them that, like, hey, right now, like, we're all a team, like, let's just focus on like really strong execution. If you guys win, we win as a company. And so we made some adjustments to our quotas just really to respond and demonstrate as a company that we were kind of understanding that productivity was no matter what going to take a hit just with everything going on.
Now, how long does this grace period go on for?
Yeah, so we determined that it was going to be through January 31st, the end of our fiscal year, so Q3 and Q4. This is a pretty big year for us, and so we wanted to get everyone super motivated to exceed our goals, and then we're going to reevaluate at the beginning of next year and, kind of seeing where things are. We're in Denver, so luckily, just the COVID situation here, generally speaking, is not as terrible as it is in a few other states. So in terms of kids going back to school, like, we're looking at it pretty holistically around just like what are the kind of personal factors that are coming into play that are affecting like the team holistically, and considering that.
Comp plans, Mario. Good, bad, ugly. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so actually interesting. We did like Melanie did, we very quickly, and you got to be very swift about this, restate your numbers and reset the expectations. And we did that very early on, and we readjusted organizational structure, we readjusted our expectations, but we also did this, which is really to drive that entire company alignment towards a goal. We basically gave marketing a 30% increase in their total TTC, or no, sorry, their total targeted compensation, the TTC. So a 30% potential raise. We gave customer success a 20% potential raise, and we gave our entire operations and business strategy team also the same thing, to be able to earn commissions off of everything that's being sold. Now, why did we do this? We very much wanted to be able to create that team collaborative environment. So we took a page out of Cloudflare. If you ever know Cloudflare's story, their founders came in and basically they all made the same exact money as the salespeople, and they all got paid the same exact commission no matter what was sold, and everybody worked together to accomplish the goal. And that's how they exploded, was because they had a team collaborative environment. And in this era, what we see going on right now is the East may not be as successful as the West or the Central, because based upon the territory and based upon the climate and the types of customers may have, there's different types of things that could factor into that. So what we did was we said, all right, this is let's not make it this very hard. Salespeople, you all get a point on commissions across everything that's sold across the company. And so what that does for the sales organization is it says, whoa, crud, if I can actually sell this big deal, these guys are going to get commissions off that, but they're going to help me with that. And oh, by the way, hey, I see Johnny's not doing his job. Whoa, wait a minute. I want Johnny to sell that big $250,000 deal so I can get my commission the same way he's working off mine. And that created an extreme amount of accountability, which we ended up having to address that on the sales side, and even terminate individuals because they were not being part of the team. On the marketing side, we did the same exact thing. We said 30% of your targeted compensation, which is an add-on to what you make today, is structured around marketing lead conversions. I'm sorry, 60% of that 30% is structured on marketing lead conversions. 40% is structured if the sales team hits their goal. Because now that really ties marketing to delivering the right type of leads to the sales organization, and we have to trust that the sales team is going to do their job, just like they have to trust that marketing is going to do theirs. And in customer success, we did the exact same thing. 20% increase, 60% of that 20% is structured around customer success metrics that help us gauge whether or not we're doing a good job from a service provider standpoint. And 40% is based upon sales hitting their target. So taking all that in consideration, you really have to think differently to be able to create that teaming environment. And we have absolutely had situations where people raised their hand and said, hey, this is not cool. I don't feel like we're winning here from a team perspective, and I want Johnny to step up.
That's great. I love that structure so much, and I applaud you for creating it, and I wish more people would follow suit. We are out of time here. Any closing remarks or last points, last thoughts from Christina or Mario before I sign us out of here?
None for
me. It was fun.
It was fun. Yeah, this was a good conversation.
The hour flew by. Yeah. All right, Kenita. Thanks for having us all and letting me be a part of it. Anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Yeah, just want to say thank you to everyone here today, for our speakers, for our attendees, and just friendly reminder that this is recorded and it will be sent to you guys. So all this awesome information will be readily available for everybody. But yeah, Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.